In October 2008, three young hikers vanished without a trace on a famous trail in the White Mountains. For 7 years, they were presumed dead, victims of a mountain accident or an unwitnessed natural incident. But in July 2016, a man stepped out onto Jefferson Notch Road as if from nowhere, alive but unrecognizable. What he told police when he was finally able to speak stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Where had he been for those 7 years, and what really happened to the three people on that fateful trip? Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On October 12, 2008, when fall was at its most vibrant in the White Mountains, New Hampshire, three close friends, Evan Miller, 27, Hannah Reyes, 24, and Tyler Brooks, 28, decided to do a one-day hike on one of the area's most famous routes. They set off from Lafayette Place Campground around 7 a.m., carrying light backpacks, water, snacks, and the essentials for a day trip. The morning weather was considered ideal for trekking. Temperatures around 48 degrees Fahrenheit, clear skies, light winds from the north, and good visibility reported on the peaks. The route the group planned was the classic traverse across Franconia Ridge, climbing up Little Haystack Mountain, walking along the spectacular ridge to Mount Lincoln, then continuing toward the summit of Mount Lafayette before turning down the Greenleaf Trail to return to the campground by late afternoon. It was a trail all three had researched thoroughly, challenging enough, but well within the abilities of moderately experienced hikers like them. That morning, security cameras at the trailhead parking lot captured the last images of the three before they disappeared. The footage showed Evan, Hannah, and Tyler standing next to a stranger in his mid-30s, carrying a DSLR camera slung in front and a small bag on his back. The man appeared friendly, pointing in a direction off the main trail and seemingly talking to the group about a better viewpoint that few people knew about. The next images showed the three leaving their planned route and following the man onto a small side path near the old bridle path, an area not clearly marked on official maps and rarely visited. Their original plan was to return to the campground around 5 p.m. to drive back to Boston that night. However, as darkness fell and none of the three made contact as expected, their families grew worried. Repeated calls and texts went unanswered. At 10:47 p.m., after nearly 5 hours of tense waiting and no way to locate anyone in the group, the families officially contacted the New Hampshire State Police to report them missing. That call became the final timestamp of October 12th, marking the shift from an unusually late hike to a true emergency. Immediately afterward, the New Hampshire State Police activated their emergency response protocol and forwarded all initial information to New Hampshire Fish and Game, the agency responsible for coordinating all search and rescue operations in the White Mountains. At first light, the next morning, as dawn touched the Franconia Range, teams from Fish and Game, the Appalachian Mountain Club, and Pemigewasset Valley Search and Rescue quickly assembled at Lafayette Place Campground, the starting point of the trio's hike and the last confirmed location. A large-scale search operation was launched right away. Ground teams began sweeping all possible routes the three might have taken, starting with Falling Waters Trail, Franconia Ridge Trail, Greenleaf Trail, and expanding to lesser-known side paths. The search grid was set up in layers. Teams swept areas near the trailhead first, then fanned out in multiple directions based on terrain and side trails. In parallel, a helicopter equipped with FLIR for detecting body heat was deployed. However, weather conditions deteriorated after just 2 days, interrupting many flights due to strong winds and low clouds, obscuring visibility along the Franconia Ridge. Though early day conditions remained fairly stable, nighttime temperatures dropped quickly below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, posing a hypothermia risk if the three were still on the mountain. SAR teams looked for every sign, slide marks on rocks, dropped personal items, fabric snagged on branches, campfire traces, but nothing was found. The complete absence of dropped items was particularly puzzling, as most hiker accidents typically leave at least some small clues on the terrain. By day 5, canine units were brought in. One search dog picked up a faint scent near the old bridle path, heading toward North Lafayette. But the trail quickly vanished in loose rock and dense forest, suggesting weather or steep terrain had erased it. In the following days, the search area expanded to Garfield Ridge and along the Appalachian Trail crossing the forest. Still, no new information emerged. With each passing day, conditions grew harder as fallen leaves blanketed the ground, wiping out any footprints from earlier. SAR Command recorded over 40 square miles covered, including hard-to-reach areas like exposed rock fields, deep ravines, thick, low-growth forest, and cold, wet zones, dangerous even for rescuers. By day 12, teams faced exhaustion and constantly changing weather. Though some volunteers pushed to continue a few more days, Command determined survival odds had dropped to near zero, given the time missing, nighttime conditions, and no signs the trio had camped or attempted distress signals. On day 14, after one final sweep of high-risk areas with no new progress, the SR operation was officially suspended for the safety of personnel. A summary report was submitted to New Hampshire State Police, concluding no evidence the three had left the area in any determined direction, nor signs of accident at common danger spots. No items found, no movement direction established, no physical clues collected. The case was classified as a missing persons incident under harsh wilderness conditions. In early 2009, the file was officially moved to cold case status, ending active search efforts, but leaving open the biggest question: what happened to Evan Miller, Hannah Reyes, and Tyler Brooks after they left the main trail that morning? For years afterward, the disappearance faded with time, surviving only in the memories of families and the investigators who took part in the SR effort. But nearly 8 years later, on the afternoon of July 19, 2016, something extraordinary happened on Jefferson Notch Road, the highest road in New Hampshire, and sparsely traveled even in summer. Around 4 p.m., two local men in a pickup truck heading down toward Crawford Notch suddenly spotted a figure stumbling out from the eastern tree line, just dozens of meters from the road. At first, they saw only a tall but unnaturally thin man staggering as if unable to control his steps. As the truck got closer, they saw his bizarre condition clearly: head shaved unevenly, scalp sunburned in patches, gaunt face, long uneven beard, deeply sunken eyes blinking constantly as if unable to tolerate light. He wore a faded, torn t-shirt far too big for his emaciated frame, and below that only thin, filthy, tattered pants. His bare feet were swollen and red, with deep gashes, crusted mud, and cracked soles as if he'd walked long distances without protection. The man staggered into the middle of the road, stood motionless for a few seconds, as if trying to get his bearings, then turned to stare back at the dark forest behind him, where dense pine canopy blocked the afternoon light. There were no signs of a backpack, outdoor gear, food, or anything suggesting he was an active hiker. One of the men got out to ask if he was lost or needed help, but the man only made scattered, hard-to-hear sounds, hoarse and faint, as if his throat was burned or unused for years. He tried to speak but produced only meaningless noises, and immediately hunched over when direct sunlight hit his face, reacting as if the light caused pain. The driver quickly realized this wasn't a typical exhausted hiker, but someone in severe physical and mental distress. They called 911 immediately, reporting a man in critical condition needing emergency medical help. While waiting for responders, they moved him to roadside shade away from direct sun. Though not aggressive, he remained extremely wary, constantly glancing back at the forest, as if more afraid of something there than the people in front of him. Every time he tried to sit or shift position, his body shook in spasms from long weakened muscles. About 20 minutes later, an ambulance from Carroll County arrived. Paramedics assessed severe dehydration, risk of heat shock, low blood pressure, weak and irregular pulse, unbelievable thinness, pale cold skin, and slow responses. They noted this didn't match typical hiking exhaustion, but showed signs of prolonged malnutrition. The man was placed on a stretcher, given IV fluids, and taken straight to Memorial Hospital in North Conway. En route, he tried to say a few words, but weakly and haltingly, repeating only unclear sounds. The ER doctor evaluated him as critically malnourished, barely conscious. Initial exams showed pale skin from prolonged lack of sunlight, severely atrophied leg muscles, soft tissue damage around ankles, old unevenly healed scratches, worn and broken nails. No ID, personal items or belongings accompanied him. His sudden appearance in one of the most remote parts of the White Mountains, in a state suggesting long-term isolation from the outside world, immediately flagged the case as highly serious to medical staff. Once in a care room, he still couldn't communicate normally, responding weakly and nearly motionless. Hospital staff could only note he appeared late 20s to early 30s, abnormally thin, with signs consistent with extended isolation. His identity was unknown at admission, but a man in this condition emerging from deep forest 8 years after the 2008 disappearance quickly drew special internal attention at the hospital, before any authorities could understand who he was and what had happened to him inside that forest. At Memorial Hospital, the process of identifying the man was prioritized immediately after his vital signs were temporarily stabilized. Since he carried no identification documents whatsoever, the hospital was forced to coordinate with the New Hampshire State Police to proceed with biometric verification steps. Fingerprints were taken first and then sent directly to the state's automated identification system. In the initial hours, the results came back incomplete because the data was blurred at several points, partly due to the man's hands being severely damaged. The forensic team had to use ridge reconstruction methods to restore the cracked or peeling patterns. By the end of the day, the comparison results showed a set of fingerprints matching a record stored from 2005, belonging to a New Hampshire citizen who had once obtained a driver's license. However, to avoid errors due to the skin condition, police continued to request that the hospital take dental X-rays and send them to the state's dental comparison unit. The dental records matched perfectly with the information of an individual reported missing since 2008, Evan Miller, age 27 at the time of disappearance. When the final results were confirmed, the New Hampshire State Police officially announced that the man found on Jefferson Notch Road was indeed Evan Miller, one of the 3 hikers who had vanished without a trace nearly 8 years earlier. This information was immediately relayed to the Miller family, who had lived through that entire period without any answers or clues about their son's fate. The family was escorted to the hospital, but even with them present in the intensive care room, Evan was still unable to recognize anyone. He lay motionless, responding slowly, with a blank stare, as if unable to connect with any familiar images. This lack of recognition further convinced the medical team that Evan may have endured a long period, completely isolated from a normal environment. As soon as his identity was established, the 2008 missing person case coded WM08144 was no longer considered closed. The New Hampshire State Police issued an internal notice. The disappearance was reclassified as a case of found survivor in abnormal condition, and the cold case file was officially reopened for a full review. On the same day, all documents related to the disappearance of Evan Miller, Hannah Reyes, and Tyler Brooks were transferred from storage to active status, preparing for a complete re-examination from the beginning. Evan Miller's return was not only a turning point in understanding the fate of the 3 friends from years ago, but also marked the reactivation of a case once deemed unsolvable. Once Evan Miller's identity was confirmed, the medical team at Memorial Hospital immediately conducted a comprehensive assessment to determine his physical and psychological condition, aiming to understand the extent of damage during the time he was missing. Initial results showed his body was severely emaciated, far different from typical cases of hikers lost in the woods. Evan's BMI was recorded below the minimum threshold needed to maintain biological functions, with almost no subcutaneous fat remaining, visibly protruding ribs, and atrophied shoulders and arms to the point where veins and bone structures were prominently visible to the naked eye. Blood tests revealed vitamin D levels nearly at rock bottom, consistent with lack of sunlight exposure for many years. Simultaneously, extremely low iron and protein levels indicated a diet over an extended period insufficient to sustain muscle mass. This clearly explained why Evan could not stand or move on his own when discovered on Jefferson Notch Road. MRI and neurological exams showed signs of widespread muscle atrophy in the legs and lower back, resulting from prolonged restricted movement. Doctors believed he may have spent years in a space where physical activity was strictly controlled or intentionally limited. In addition to musculoskeletal issues, peripheral evaluations noted numerous scars and small repetitive injuries on the wrists and ankles, circular and uniform as if caused by friction from rough restraints. Some older scars were precisely located at points of contact with cuffs or bindings, suggesting these injuries were not accidental but resulted from repeated pressure over a long time. Certain areas of skin around the wrists still showed slight discoloration, indicating they had once been tightly constricted for extended periods, affecting peripheral blood flow. Additionally, long and shallow scratches appeared around the ankles, possibly from attempts to pull away from metal surfaces or binding cords. Notably, Evan's scalp showed signs of being recently shaved within 1 to 2 weeks prior to being found. The scalp skin was uneven in color, with large sunburn patches from exposure to light after prolonged covering, indicating the shaving was not voluntary but likely occurred under conditions of no control. Overall, physiologically, Evan's immune system was markedly weakened. CRP and white blood cell test results showed signs of chronic infection prior to discovery, even though no open wounds were present. This raised the possibility that he had lived in a damp, poorly ventilated environment where bacteria and mold could easily spread. Lung examinations noted mild tissue damage, consistent with long-term breathing in a confined space with poor air quality. While the physical injuries were enough to raise questions about a restricted living environment, Evan's psychological state revealed even more severe trauma. Through initial evaluation sessions, the psychologist noted that Evan was in a state of extreme hypervigilance, reacting strongly to sudden noises, especially metallic sounds like doors unlocking or hard objects falling on the floor. He often twitched slightly when bright light shone into his eyes and instinctively turned his head to seek darkness or dimmer light. These reactions suggested he had endured extended time in a low-light environment where bright light was perceived as a threat or painful factor. In the early stage, Evan could not communicate fluently. When asked about the time he was absent, his living environment, or the condition of his 2 companions, he only responded with fragmented, incomplete sentences lacking logical flow. Many times, he repeated the same meaningless phrases, as if tied to an obsessive experience: dim light, machine running, door below. When doctors pressed for details, he could not continue but only trembled, with rapid breathing and panicked eyes. At times, Evan showed signs of temporary cognitive dissociation, staring fixedly at a point on the wall without blinking, as if reliving memories he could not organize into words. Though unable to recount a full story, the scattered memory fragments he mentioned indicated that his missing time was not associated with natural conditions or ordinary accidents. Typical psychological reactions such as flinching at fan noises, startling at heavy footsteps, or avoiding enclosed hospital spaces were continuously recorded. Doctors noted that Evan exhibited signs of severe post-traumatic stress disorder mixed with prolonged malnutrition and time disorientation. During his hospital stay, he did not actively seek to go outside, ask about his family, or seek information about what had happened. Instead, he constantly watched the room door as if waiting for something to appear from the other side, even though no one approached. The pervasive stress in all his reactions led the specialist team to agree that this was not the consequence of being lost in the woods, but more consistent with prolonged captivity in a fully controlled environment where light, air, sound, and even body movement were systematically restricted. Immediately after Evan Miller's medical and psychological evaluations were sent to the New Hampshire State Police, the investigation unit promptly reactivated the WM0-8144 file, which had been classified as a cold case since 2009. The first meeting of the investigative team took place at the Lincoln Police Department headquarters, gathering representatives from the NH State Police Major Crime Unit, the Special Investigation Division of Fish and Game, and criminal data analysis experts. The initial goal was to summarize the entire 2008 file, reviewing every detail to identify points that might have been overlooked at the time. The SR reports from the 2-week search were re-examined. No items were found, no signs of slipping or falling into ravines, no distress signals, and no evidence that the group of hikers attempted to set up temporary shelter. This was unusual because in most accident situations, victims typically leave some traces or unintentional signals while trying to survive. When placing these facts alongside Evans' current condition, atrophied muscles, lack of light exposure, restraint marks, recently shaved head, the investigators reached a consensus that the lost and died from exposure hypothesis, considered the most likely in 2008, was no longer viable. Instead, the manifestations on Evans' body indicated he had been in a state of restricted movement, limited light, and controlled nutrition for an extended period, which could only occur if he was held captive in a confined, controlled location. After agreeing that the new data necessitated a criminal investigation direction, the team moved to re-evaluate all video and image materials collected from 2008. Among them, footage from the security camera at Lafayette Place Campground was deemed most important as it was the last recording of the three before they vanished. This video, in 2008, had never been considered valuable criminal evidence because the man appearing with the group was assessed as an ordinary hiker. However, with the new facts, investigators decided to analyze every frame again. The images showed the strange man carrying a DSLR camera appearing with the three just minutes before they left the main trail. His demeanor, natural approach, and offer to lead them to a better viewpoint had not raised suspicion in the crowded tourist context, but suddenly became a key detail. The fact that all three turned onto an unmarked side branch with this stranger was the only detail linking the moment they were still safe to the moment of disappearance. The investigative team immediately requested enhanced facial recognition analysis from the footage, using modern image improvement technology superior to the 2008 system. While identifying the man still required more time, the team reached a preliminary conclusion that he could be a critical link in the entire sequence of events. From there, investigators posed the big question: if Evan was held captive for a long time, where was the captivity location? Based on Evan's emaciated state when found, doctors confirmed he could not have walked more than a few miles from where he escaped or was released before reaching Jefferson Notch Road. This significantly narrowed the search area. The mountainous forest terrain around Jefferson Notch features many rugged areas, ancient rock foundations, dense unmarked forest sections, and numerous unregistered old cabins illegally built in the 1980s, 1990s. The list of locations previously reported as having temporary structures, old bunkers or hidden forest constructions, was compiled again by Fish and Game and ranked by suspiciousness. Concurrently, the investigative team mapped Evans' possible walking path based on his discovery location, combining the movement speed of an exhausted person with real terrain, establishing a reasonable radius to begin zoning. The fact that he appeared on the west side of Jefferson Notch Road led investigators to focus on rocky slopes and secluded valleys between Jefferson Notch and deep side branches into the Kilkenny wilderness. At the end-of-day meeting, New Hampshire State Police reached consensus. The 2008 missing person case was officially converted to a criminal investigation with the focus on locating the captivity site. A plan was drawn up to zone suspicious areas into layers, prioritizing hard-to-access places not on official hiking maps or rarely visited. Evans' survival return, despite his exhausted state, indicated he had been in a confined, isolated space from the outside environment, enough to convince the entire investigative team that they must reopen the case from scratch, with the central hypothesis no longer a natural accident but human intervention. After the file was reclassified as a criminal investigation, the New Hampshire State Police Task Force, coordinating with Fish and Game and the mountain tracking team, proceeded to the next step. narrowing the search area in the Kilkenny wilderness, assessed as the highest probability location related to where Evan Miller was held. The zoning radius was determined based on Evan's appearance position at Jefferson Notch Road and medical analyses indicating he could not have moved more than a few miles in his exhausted state. Investigators selected the east and southeast areas of Jefferson Notch, including regions with many rocky slopes, deep forest, and narrow valleys that are difficult to access, as well as places previously noted for some self-built cabins from prior decades. To initiate the tracing process, the technical team deployed high-resolution camera drones with optical sensors to survey the entire forest surface from above. The drones flew in parallel scanning patterns, covering vast areas impossible to survey by eye from the ground. The captured images showed characteristic uneven terrain, many long soil slopes running parallel to granite mountainsides, small ravines and forest sections so dense that light barely penetrated. This terrain matched Evans' fragmented descriptions of long slopes and confined space, especially areas with thick canopy, significantly reducing natural light reaching the ground. Investigators noted areas with unusually low light levels as the likelihood of man-made structures or illegal shelters existing in such zones was higher than normal. Meanwhile, the ground tracking team simultaneously checked side trails and off-map areas showing signs of past human passage. They searched for small traces like compacted soil, branches broken in a consistent direction, or areas where the leaf litter layer was thinner than surroundings. One of the first discoveries was a segment of orange flagging tape tied to a branch about 4 feet off the ground. Flagging tape is typically used by maintenance staff or geological survey teams, but the type found did not match AMC or Fish and Game standards, which have specific markings and patterns. The appearance of anonymous flagging tape in a low-traffic area led the investigative team to view it as a sign of unofficial individual activity in the forest. When expanding the search around that area, the tracking team noted other signs indicating prolonged human movement, soil on some slopes compacted deeper than normal, not resembling random hiker traffic, but more like repeated passage over time. Some tree roots were chopped or shortened with sharp tools, not by animals. Pieces of rotten wood displaced in small straight lines, possibly from someone creating a personal forest path. Notably, certain spots had less leaf litter on the ground than surrounding areas, indicating frequent disturbance. Additionally, drones recorded some areas with abnormal distribution from above, sudden splits in dense forest by small trail-like breaks, not matching any recorded hiking routes. These breaks were not large, but recognizable as human-created over time, possibly for discreet travel without detection. The investigative team paid special attention to a forest section with unusually thick canopy density, where drones measured significantly lower ground light levels than nearby areas. The strong light restriction suggested the possibility of structures beneath the canopy or recessed terrain, fitting the confined space description and Evans' light fear reactions, though data from him remained too limited for conclusions. When the ground tracking team approached this area, they recorded another important sign: consistently broken branches at hip height, forming a narrow entryway that an average person would hardly notice without close observation. This is the type of sign often seen when someone deliberately creates an unofficial path and repeatedly returns the same way. Some areas also showed small cuts on tree trunks with sharp tools, like temporary markings from someone living or moving long-term in the forest. After 3 days of continuous survey, investigators compiled all signs into a tactical map: areas with strange flagging tape, locations with self-made paths, points with abnormal soil compaction, and regions with thick canopy darkening the ground. When combining these data with Evans' discovery position and his maximum exhaustion movement radius, the map revealed a suspicious cluster area nearly 2 square miles east of Jefferson Notch Road. Though no specific structure was yet identified, the convergence of multiple signs related to prolonged human activity, from non-standard flagging tape to old movement traces, made this area marked as the highest priority. If a secret captivity site existed in the Kilkenny forest, it was highly likely within this newly narrowed range. Based on that conclusion, the Fish and Game Tracking Team, along with the State Police Ground Investigation Unit, began pushing deeper into the forested area east of Jefferson Notch Road. Around midday on the fourth day of the survey, the drone detected a small anomaly in the color of the forest canopy, a rectangular patch with shadowing that differed from the natural distribution of the trees. When zooming in on the image, the analysis team realized that this square structure was most likely the roof of a man-made building concealed by the tree canopy. This was the first point within the narrowed search area that indicated the presence of a fixed structure. A three-person team was dispatched to check it directly. It took them nearly 2 hours to reach it through thick underbrush, over a rocky slope, and along narrow passages that were not part of any official hiking trails. At the marked location, they discovered a small wooden cabin deep in the dense forest, one that did not appear on any list of legal cabins managed by the Forest Service. The structure measured approximately 10 x 14 feet, with walls made of old pine logs and a metal roof that was heavily rusted in places. The cabin door was secured from the outside with a wooden bar slid across it, but without any modern lock, suggesting the structure had once been used but abandoned for some time. However, upon closer inspection, the investigation team discovered that the cabin was not as completely neglected as its exterior suggested. Several planks on the north wall showed signs of having been replaced within the past few years. The wood was lighter in color and had not yet faded or cracked from weathering like the rest. The steel nails in that area also showed less corrosion than the rest of the cabin, proving that it had been repaired or maintained relatively recently, rather than being an illegally built structure abandoned for decades like many others in the forest. Another notable detail was that the window on the right side was covered with 3 layers of boards nailed tightly from the outside. Sealing the window from the exterior was inconsistent with the characteristics of a rest cabin or an old abandoned one. Instead, it suggested the cabin was intentionally kept dark or to restrict visibility from inside. After photographing the entire structure, the investigation team decided to remove the wooden bar and enter for inspection. Inside the cabin, a thick layer of dust covered most surfaces, indicating it had not been used for a considerable period. However, the interior layout was not typical of a shelter cabin. There was no single bed, no cooking utensils, and no signs of everyday living activities. The space was unusually empty, containing only an old wooden table placed against the wall. Under the table legs, the investigation team found small drag marks, showing that the table had been moved around the cabin multiple times. But the most important discovery was a DSLR camera placed on the table, sitting amid the dust, but with the device itself not as heavily covered as other items. The camera was an older Canon model, but still in intact condition, without serious damage. Inside it was an SD card, showing signs of use more recent than the cabin's age. The device was seized according to evidence procedures, placed in an anti-static bag, and logged with the time of discovery. No separate battery, charger, or other accessories were found, but the presence of a relatively modern camera in an unregistered cabin deep in the forest was a clear point of suspicion. There were also no signs of current habitation in the cabin. No food, no clothing, no personal items, and no evidence of fire building or food preparation. However, the partial repairs to the cabin suggested that someone had returned at some point not too long ago to maintain or use it. The investigation team documented all details, photographed the cabin inside and out, and marked the location on the investigation map. When cross-referencing the cabin with the 2008 footage, the investigators noted that the man seen with Evan, Hannah, and Tyler was also carrying a DSLR similar to the one found in the cabin. Although it could not yet be confirmed as the same device, the match in camera characteristics and the context around the cabin made this location the first in the Kilkenny forest to show direct signs of connection to the disappearance of the 3 hikers. The cabin was immediately designated a key crime scene and became a critical link in efforts to reconstruct the years that Evan could not remember. From there, the investigation team shifted focus to analyzing the seized electronic device. The SD card from the DSLR was immediately sent to the Digital Forensics Lab of the New Hampshire State Police, where forensic experts began the data recovery process under conditions where the device had been exposed to years of damp cold but remained intact enough for extraction. They used specialized recovery software to reconstruct the full file structure, including partially deleted or overwritten files. After nearly 6 hours of processing, the system revealed 437 recoverable image files spanning from 2004 to late 2008. There were no videos, only still photos. The experts began categorizing the images by timestamp and content. About 60% of the photos were portraits of individual hikers or groups in various mountainous areas within the White Mountains range. These faces were not immediately identified, but most shared a common trait. They were standing far off the main trails, with many shots taken in rock alcoves, remote open areas rarely visited, or ledges not listed among popular photo spots. Many images had similar compositions, the subject centered, with stiff expressions, no smiles, shoulders slightly hunched as if uncomfortable or lacking confidence in being photographed. Some people even looked away from the lens, with unusually tense gazes. These details led the technicians to note that the photographer may have controlled or directed them to stand in specific positions. However, the core of the analysis focused on the group of photos taken on October 12, 2008. Among them, 14 images clearly showed Evan Miller, Hannah Reyes, and Tyler Brooks in completely normal condition on the morning of their disappearance. The photos depicted the three standing on a small rocky outcrop beside a side branch of the old bridle path, with no other hikers around. The photographer was close enough to hear their conversation, with a low, slightly forward-leaning angle, as if standing near the group and asking them to step back a bit for the background. Analysis of the three's skin tones indicated clear lighting consistent with around 9 a.m., matching the trailhead footage timestamp. In the photos, Evan stood on the left, hand on his backpack strap, looking directly at the camera but not smiling. Hannah in the middle, hands gripping her hydration tube, face slightly tense and wary. Tyler on the right, one foot shifted, eyes glancing slightly left as if observing something outside the frame. The experts concluded that the trio's expressions did not fully align with natural photos requested by hikers. In particular, their stances were repetitive. Feet wider than normal, hands not relaxed but clenched in fixed positions. This suggested the photographer had given specific instructions. Upon deeper examination of the image structure, the technical team realized the key element was not the three victims, but the photographer's chosen angles. All photos were taken from a low and close position, making the subjects appear tall and passive. This composition repeated across many other hiker photos on the card, reinforcing that it was a controlling style, not typical of landscape or casual souvenir photography. Next, the analysis team examined the EXIF metadata for location data. Although GPS coordinates were mostly stripped from the images, some files retained raw data in secondary memory, enough to reconstruct relative positions using EXIF recovery tools. The results showed the photos of the three victims were taken in an area deeper than the main old bridle path, approximately 1.3 miles southeast of the drone-discovered cabin location. This placed it within the exact zone the tracking team had circled, based on anomalies like unusual flagging tape and compacted soil. The photo location matching the suspect area strengthened the conclusion that the cabin and the camera user were directly related to the moment the three left the main trail and vanished. Expanding the analysis to other hiker photos on the card, the technical team uncovered additional notable points. Some subjects displayed similarly tense or puzzled expressions as the three victims. Certain photos showed people standing dangerously close to ledge edges or steep drops, positions normal hikers rarely chose for photos. Other late-afternoon shots placed subjects in low-light areas, yet required them to stand still in frame. None of the photos included the photographer with the group or self-portraits, but the consistently low and stable angles indicated the camera holder was over 5 feet 10 inches tall and often stood very close, sometimes only 3-4 feet away. These details suggested the photographer actively approached hikers in the forest, rather than encountering them by chance. During the analysis, the technical team found one particularly important photo, an image of a large rock slab covered in moss and fallen leaves, with small cut marks along the edge, matching the location where the tracking team had found branch breaks and sharp object slashes in the suspect area. The match between physical field evidence and the SD card photo confirmed a direct link between the seized camera and the anomalies noted in the recent forest sweep. The SD card recovery not only provided visual evidence that the three victims had direct contact with the man from the 2008 footage, but also proved that many other hikers had been approached by this individual and photographed under ambiguous and uncomfortable circumstances. This was the first digital evidence of a lone individual operating in the forest over multiple years, using the camera as an initial contact method. The presence of the DSLR and SD card containing disappearance day photos of Evan, Hannah, and Tyler made the cabin the clearest connection to the 2008 vanishing and opened a major investigative direction into the camera owner and the forest locations where this person had taken hikers. Once the memory card analysis was complete and the investigation team had identified relative locations for several photos taken on October 12, 2008, they decided to attempt further memory probing with Evan Miller, despite knowing his recall ability was severely limited after years of captivity and profound psychological trauma. The goal was not to force full recollection, but to elicit memory fragments that aligned with field data to further narrow the search area. Psychologists and investigators conducted a controlled memory elicitation session in a dimly lit room at Memorial Hospital to avoid triggering Evan's photosensitivity reactions. They presented him with carefully selected images from the SD card, focusing on those involving terrain, spatial layout, and environmental cues that might stimulate sensory memory. As soon as the first images appeared, Evan did not look directly at them, but glanced quickly, as if unwilling to engage with the content, yet compelled to acknowledge it. When the third image appeared, the narrow ledge where the three stood on the morning of the disappearance, Evan froze for several seconds. His eyes narrowed, breathing quickened, but he did not spiral into panic as before. The investigator noted this as the first clear recognition response Evan had shown to an image tied to the disappearance day. After he stabilized, they moved to other forest location photos, dense canopy shots, a long dirt slope, a narrow trail with exposed roots, and moss-covered boulders. Evan reacted mildly to most, but when an image of a steep hillside edge, captured by drone in the suspect area, appeared, his body visibly tensed. He tilted his head toward the photo, as if trying to confirm something familiar, but unable to articulate it. The psychologist asked him to describe what he felt, not to recount events, a technique used for PTSD patients who lose sequential recall but retain sensory memory. Evan did not respond immediately, but after nearly a minute of silence, he took a deep breath and uttered one clear, quiet word: slope. This caused the entire team to pause. Slope was the only structured word Evan had ever spoken related to the environment he had been in. The investigator continued by placing next to the hillside image another photo: the cabin with its boarded window. Evan pulled his head back slightly and turned his face away, as if unwilling to look at the cabin. This was not specific recognition, but an avoidance response, suggesting the cabin or its surroundings evoked danger for him. Continuing the session, the investigator showed images of dense canopy in the area where drone data indicated unusual light blockage. When dappled light spots appeared in the photo, Evan suddenly closed his eyes and hunched slightly, as if reacting to bright light. The specialist noted this as a phobic response consistent with Evan's prior negative reactions to strong light in his hospital room. Next, they presented a photo of moss on rotting wood beside a small rock crevice. This image matched the rotting wood smell Evan had mentioned during a panic episode. This time, Evan did not avoid it, but looked longer. Though unable to express fully, he murmured two disconnected sounds: smell, damp. This was the first emergence of olfactory memory. Having recorded sufficient sensory responses, the team attempted to access auditory memory. They played a recording of an old small generator, low uneven tone fluctuating with load changes. Immediately, Evan hunched and his eyes widened as if the sound triggered a strong memory. He placed a hand on his chest, breathing rapidly, not extreme fear but clear recognition. When the doctor asked familiar, Evan nodded slightly. This was significant. In his memory, the generator sound was prolonged and cyclical, not sudden like wildlife or wind. Finally, the team showed a drone photo of the angled view of the densest tree cover in the narrowed zone, where light barely reached the ground. Viewing this, Evan did not flinch or show fear but something different. His gaze lingered longer, brows lightly furrowed as if searching for a familiar point. When the doctor asked what came to mind, Evan did not speak but raised his hand, pointed to a dark corner at the bottom edge of the photo, and said one word: below. Throughout the entire elicitation process, this was the first time Evan demonstrated clear spatial designation. The word below was recorded, along with his pointing to the unusually shadowed area, creating a key link to the phrase he had repeatedly muttered when first found: door below. When all data was compiled, the investigation team realized each of Evan's responses aligned with a specific environmental type: dark, light-restricted space, sloped terrain, smell of rot and dampness, prolonged generator sound, and the below element suggesting underground or semi-subterranean structure. Mapping these responses against topographic data and drone findings, the team eliminated about 3/4 of the initial suspect area. Zones with strong light, open terrain, or no slope features were ruled out. Only a small remaining zone, less than 0.4 square miles, remained, located deep between intersecting slopes with extremely dense canopy cover and no official access. This was the first area in the entire investigation to simultaneously match all the elements suggested by Evan's fragmented memories. Narrowing the search to such a small scale marked a major advancement in the effort to locate where he had been held during the years he was missing. When the search area was narrowed down to under 0.4 square miles based on Evan's memory responses and drone terrain data, the investigation team deployed ground search personnel in a dense grid pattern to scan every square meter of the zone. This was an extremely difficult to access forested area. Long steep slopes, many sections slippery due to thick moss cover, tree canopy so dense that sunlight only filtered through in patchy streaks, and no signs of any regular trails. Movement was slow and laborious, but the search team had to meticulously check every tree trunk, every exposed rock outcrop, and every natural feature that could conceal an entrance. On the third day of searching in the narrowed zone, a group consisting of 3 state police investigators and 2 fish and game members unexpectedly discovered a small but unusual detail: an area of ground with lower compaction than the surroundings, an abnormally thin layer of fallen leaves, and signs of having been disturbed not too long ago, though subtly enough to avoid notice from a distance. This contrasted with the surrounding area, which was covered by a thick layer of leaves accumulated over many years. They bent down to examine it and realized the anomaly was not in the surface soil itself, but in the structure beneath. When probing firmly into the topsoil with a stick, the sound produced was not that of solid earth, but of hitting a hollow surface or hidden wooden structure below. From there, the investigation team began gently brushing aside the thin layer of leaves and soil. Within just a few minutes, the edge of a wooden panel emerged. Not natural tree wood, but processed and cut lumber shaped into a rectangle, flat enough to serve as a cover. The top surface was covered in dust and decayed leaves, but once the covering was cleared, the team saw that it was set flush with the ground level, fitting so tightly with the surrounding soil edge that it blended almost completely with the natural environment. This was clearly not a random fallen log or forest debris, but a deliberately camouflaged trapdoor. After confirming the area was safe and ensuring no mechanical traps were present, the investigation team used a pry bar gently to lift one edge of the panel. The initial lift was ineffective, indicating the hatch was hinged on the opposite side. When they switched to lifting the other edge, the door slowly rose, revealing a pitch-black void below, cold and silent to the point that even the sound of the forest wind above seemed distant. A rush of damp, stale air wafted up, carrying the smell of rotting wood and long-standing mold, matching the sensory memories Evan had described. When flashlights were shown downward, a wooden ladder system appeared, leading into a space approximately 10 feet deep from ground level. The steps were built from pine lumber, some covered in thick dust but still sturdy, indicating they had been maintained at some points in the past. The investigation team sent one member, equipped with a safety harness and air filtering mask, down first. Upon reaching the bottom, the surface was not natural earth, but flat wooden planking, showing this was a fully constructed space rather than a temporary dugout. After confirming no immediate hazards, the remaining members descended. Flashlight beams revealed a completely man-made bunker interior. A main chamber roughly 10 decks 12 feet with hand-built wooden walls, sturdy but not finely crafted. The planks ran parallel, with sections reinforced by crude metal or plywood. There were no windows and no gaps for outside light to enter, consistent with Evan's long-term light deprivation. The ceiling was low, only about 6 feet high, forcing taller individuals to stoop slightly. Flashlight reflections glinted off old screws, many corroded but still in place, indicating the bunker was built longer ago than Evan's disappearance, but not so old as to be completely rotted. Notably, on the west side was a fixed wooden bed frame attached to the wall, with drill holes on the crossbars that could have been used to attach restraints or bindings. The wood surface of the frame had numerous parallel indentations, small round depressions resembling marks from metal or hard objects pressing into the surface over time. The bunker floor was thick plywood, with areas near the walls discolored from moisture, showing poor ventilation. 2 corners showed traces of water seepage from outside, but only in drips, not enough to flood the space. Near the ceiling, a small curved metal vent pipe about 3 feet long extended toward the rear of the bunker, with its external opening concealed by dry leaves and thin soil, a basic but effective camouflage technique. Additionally, the investigation team noted tally marks carved into the wall near the bed area, evenly spaced straight lines in clusters of 30 or 31, possibly representing days or months tracked over time. Though not enough to interpret intent, these marks indicated the place had been used continuously for an extended period by one or more persons. The ceiling also held a small bulb wired to a homemade electrical system running up to the surface through a narrow groove along the wall. Closer inspection showed the wiring led to the hatch edge, meaning the bunker's only light depended on an external power source, most likely the generator Evan recalled hearing. Against the east wall was a small crude wooden table, thick with dust on top but with light scratches around the legs, indicating it had been moved or dragged multiple times. The bunker showed no signs of ordinary living items like cooking pots, fabrics, or personal belongings. This suggested its purpose was not habitation or shelter but detention, isolation, and control of a captive. The absence of clutter or daily life traces, combined with only fixed structures, reinforced that the space was intentionally designed to restrict movement and deprive occupants of natural environmental elements. The entire area was carefully photographed and measured. Investigators noted the bunker's construction was more finished than a typical shelter, but not sophisticated enough to be professional. It was intermediate, durable, sealed, and maintained sufficiently for long-term detention without requiring major resources. When all physical evidence was compiled, the depth, spatial layout, bed and ventilation arrangement, and especially the complete concealment from natural light, the investigation team reached a critical conclusion. This was not merely a temporary hideout, but a bunker built and maintained, with a clear purpose to detain one or more individuals for extended periods without leaving traces on the forest surface. Once the investigation team completed documenting the main bunker structure, they expanded the examination of the entire underground space for direct criminal evidence. After closely inspecting the wooden wall panels, one investigator noticed a very narrow gap at the junction between the north and east walls, just wide enough for flashlight beam to penetrate when pressed close. When gently prying the panel with a crowbar, a removable board came loose, revealing a narrow compartment about 3 feet wide and over 4 feet deep, hidden completely behind the main wall, an area not shown in the initial bunker sketch. This structure was not accidental. It was skillfully concealed with a board matching the rest in color, secured by old screws to appear seamless. When flashlights illuminated the hidden compartment, the team immediately recognized it as a secret storage area containing numerous items unlikely to belong to the bunker's owner and highly likely related directly to victims. On the compartment floor, they found a pair of trail-running shoes caked with dried mud, but with tread patterns still clear, the same model family confirmed Evan wore on October 12, 2008. The shoes showed no unusual tears or wear, as would be expected if lost in the wild, indicating they were not accidentally left behind, but deliberately collected and stored. Next to the shoes was a moss-green bandana tied into a small knot with strands of long brown hair attached, matching the hair color of Hannah Reyes. When seizing this evidence, investigators noted a strong musty odor, suggesting it had been stuffed or bound in a confined space for a long time. More critically, in the corner of the compartment, they found an old black cloth bag containing a key item, a clear nylon bag holding cut or closely shaved hair, including many strands under 2 mm. By color and length, this was not naturally shed hair, but hair removed by blade. Subsequent rapid DNA testing at a mobile lab set up outside the forest matched perfectly with Evan Miller's DNA profile, confirming at least some of his hair had been collected and preserved in the bunker. Behind the compartment were 2 coils of thin but extremely strong nylon restraint cord, each over 2 meters long. One coil was frayed and twisted in the middle, indicating heavy tightening. This matched scarring on Evan's wrists and ankles. Near the cords was a roll of industrial-grade duct tape with partially dried adhesive, but still sticky enough to pick up fine dust when touched, showing it had been used in the bunker and then stored. Investigators also discovered a small leather-bound notebook, palm-sized, placed in a low wooden box. The cover was old and dry, but pages inside were well preserved due to the sealed, low-air environment. It was handwritten in black ballpoint pen with clear, non-scribbled lettering. Contents did not name victims, but consisted of date-coded entries spanning late 2008 to mid-2015. Written in tabular form, 1 month per page, each day with its own symbol, some days circled or crossed out. Scattered notes included: adjust morning hours, 24:45 minutes, lights off, machine noise, stable, or good silence. Though not fully decoded, investigators recognized these codes described daily control of the captive, including light duration, power source changes, or generator cycles. Some entries were directive: no exit, no response. Keep quiet, showing the notebook's author used the bunker to manage a detained individual. On the October 2008 page, 4 days were heavily circled: 12, 13, 14, and 15, matching the disappearance dates of the 3 victims. Pages from 2009-2012 repeatedly noted silence, no ladder use, and no hatch opening. From 2013-2015, entries tapered off, but included sporadic marks like still, weak, and check pipe. This was crucial evidence proving the bunker was not only built but actively used from 2008-2015, aligning with Evan's missing years and physical signs of prolonged captivity. In the deepest corner of the compartment, the team found a heavy item, a large black plastic bin containing assorted objects, including a faded red backpack with one strap half cut. The model later confirmed as Tyler Brooks's per family description. Inside the backpack were no personal items, but an old name tag in the lining still faintly read TB. Also present was a 2006 model handheld flashlight, lightly rusted but with handwritten initials, EM on the body. Evan's marking style from past hiking trips, confirmed by family. The presence of items belonging to both Evan and Tyler indicated the bunker served as a collection point for victims' belongings and likely the site where they were held after being led off the main trail. Among other personal items, investigators found a large gray cloth folded multiple times with machine oil-like stains. When unfolded, the inner surface held numerous long brown and short blonde hairs, suggesting it was used as a covering or mat during victim transport. At one edge was a small piece of duct tape with attached hair, seized for DNA comparison. On the opposite wall from the hidden compartment was a smaller wooden hatch. Opening it revealed a shallow 2-foot-deep recess containing an old gasoline-powered mini-generator, long inactive but still strongly smelling of fuel. This was almost certainly the noise source Evan vividly remembered. The machine was thick with dust on top, but dust beneath was disturbed, indicating regular use over years before abandonment. The power cable running from the generator through the vent pipe to the ceiling light perfectly matched Evan's description of dim light and generator noise. The discovery of these items led to a clear conclusion. The bunker was not a temporary shelter, but systematically operated with routines and cycles for long-term human detention. Multiple items bearing Evan's DNA, along with belongings of all three victims, established this space once held at least the 2008 missing persons. The notebook documenting bunker maintenance from 2008 to 2015 allowed investigators to conclude the operator used the site nearly continuously for 7 years, the exact period Evan was missing without trace, confirming the bunker was not merely a holding place, but the perpetrator's primary operational center throughout that time. When the bunker was confirmed as the primary detention site, and the seized evidence indicated the presence of 3 victims in that space, the NH State Police immediately expanded the search operation to the surrounding area, focusing on a 500-meter radius from the hatch location. The Fish and Game SAR team, PVSR, and the terrain tracking team were mobilized back to the scene, this time applying a concentric circle search model, increasing survey density in areas with rugged terrain or heavy cover, places the perpetrator might have used as disposal sites. Data from the SD card and the detention log in the bunker showed that the captivity lasted continuously for at least 7 years, but there were no notes describing the long-term maintenance of 2 victims. This led the investigation team to suspect that Hannah Reyes or Tyler Brooks may have died outside the bunker in the early stage, especially based on the long hair traces matching Hannah's sample found in the storage compartment. In the first 2 days, the search team found no notable signs beyond old compacted soil and naturally broken branches. However, on the 3rd day, a Fish and Game member discovered a small but unusual detail on an eastern rocky slope. About 320 meters from the bunker there was a section of rock thickly covered in moss, but at the lower edge, a bare rock patch in an arch shape appeared, only visible when someone accidentally brushed away the dry leaves on the ground. This discovery prompted the search team to focus on that area, expanding the sweep around the slope. When moving down about 5 meters lower, an investigator noticed a small rock crevice almost completely concealed by dry branches and thick moss, making it feel like a natural part of the terrain. But when probing lightly with a stick, the echo did not sound like solid rock but hollow, as if there was a larger cavity inside. The team decided to clear the natural cover, and after a few minutes of removing rock fragments and dry leaves, the mouth of a narrow rock cave gradually opened up. Flashlights shone deep inside, revealed only pitch blackness with no reflection, indicating the cave extended deep under the slope. For safety, the SAR team used safety ropes to lower one member inside. After descending about 3 meters, that person called up to report discovering signs of an unnatural object on the cave floor. When the team widened the entrance to allow 2 people to descend at once, they realized the cave floor was nearly 2 x 3 meters wide, with cold stone walls covered in soft moss, but the focal point was a human skeleton lying on its left side, with the rib cage and leg bones still intact, the skull tilted toward the cave bottom. The skeleton was wearing the remnants of a nylon trail-running jacket that had rotted over time, but the base color was still recognizable as moss green, matching the jacket that Hannah Reyes's family confirmed she had worn on the day she went missing. Investigators quickly sealed off the cave area, collecting the bones and items according to crime scene preservation procedures. The skeleton was brought to the surface in the most intact state possible and transferred to the temporary forensic lab set up near the SAR coordination station. There, the medical examiner began a preliminary assessment. The skull belonged to a female, with age consistent with Hannah's at the time of disappearance. Long bones indicated a height of about 5'4" to 5'6", matching her profile. No soft tissue remained, but many fabric fragments rotted around the shoulder and backbone still retained the shape of backpack straps, including a faded red nylon piece confirmed to match the strap sample from Hannah's backpack. When examining the teeth, the forensic team discovered 3 left molars filled with white composite, a feature noted by Hannah's dentist in 2006. Dental records were compared with data from the family and Hannah's dentist. The match was perfect. Thus, the body in the cave was definitively identified as Hannah Reyes, who had gone missing with Evan and Tyler on October 12, 2008. Continuing to assess the decomposition level, the medical examiner noted that the dry bone condition, lack of soft tissue, and the darkening of the bone surface suggested time of death around 14–18 months after the disappearance. One rib had a sharp fracture, not caused by geological pressure or rock collapse, but consistent with external impact force, though not sufficient to absolutely determine cause of death. However, the body's position deep in the narrow cave with no signs of crawling or scratching to escape indicated she was placed there already dead or incapable of moving herself. Additionally, no personal items like phone, compass, or intact backpack were found, reinforcing the likelihood that she was stripped of all belongings before being brought here. Another important detail, the soil at the cave mouth showed signs of periodic disturbance, indicating someone had repeatedly entered the area to check or manipulate after the body was placed inside. This matched the contents of the journal found in the bunker, where months in 2009 had many circled marks and scattered notes like "no longer," "check slope," and "stable." Investigators concluded that these notes most likely reflected the perpetrator monitoring the body's condition or ensuring the cave remained undiscovered. Preliminary forensic results suggested Hannah may have died in late 2009, about 1 year after the trio went missing. Her dying much earlier than when Evan was found in 2016 raised the possibility that she was the first victim to die during captivity. The investigation team noted no evidence that Hannah had ever escaped or left the bunker alive, making determination of cause of death more complicated. One final point further, confirming intentional concealment, the entire cave was covered with moss and dry branches, matching natural rock crevices, a camouflage technique similar to the bunker hatch, indicating the same method and the same hand at work. When synthesizing physical evidence, forensic data, and bunker records, the investigation team officially concluded that the body found in the cave was Hannah Reyes, the second victim of the 2008 disappearance case, who died around 2009 under undetermined circumstances, but directly related to the perpetrator who operated the bunker for many years. The investigation team immediately expanded the search further, as identifying Hannah's body made locating Tyler Brooks, the only remaining victim whose fate was unknown, the top priority. When Hannah's body was found in the cave near the bunker, the investigation team immediately expanded the search to deeper areas of the Kilkenny Range, with the hypothesis that the perpetrator may have dispersed the victims across multiple locations to avoid detection. Based on topographic maps, potential perpetrator movement routes, and scattered notes in the bunker log, especially entries from 2011 and 2012, with symbols like check cabin and stable, the team delineated an area of nearly 0.6 square miles to the north, where the terrain was steeper but with less low brush, suitable for erecting a large structure and maintaining it long-term without leaving many surface traces. On the fifth survey day, a drone recorded a small anomaly. Amid dense canopy, there was a larger metal roof than the first cabin, but the roof was covered in thick moss and dry leaves, making it visible only when morning light hit at a low angle. When the ground team approached, they discovered a cabin approximately 16 x 20 feet, nearly double the size of the first cabin. This cabin was concealed by dry branches, vines, and years of accumulated vegetation, showing the owner had camouflaged it more thoroughly. Unlike the first cabin, this one had a door locked from the outside with a rusted metal bar, but the hinges were newer, replaced within the last few years. There were no fresh footprints around the four sides, but the surrounding ground was unevenly sunken, indicating past traffic. Upon breaking the lock and entering, the investigation team noted the cabin was much larger in area, but almost empty. No daily living items, no bed, no electrical equipment, just a long table, a few planks leaning against the wall, and a very wide open space in the center of the floor. The cabin had two windows completely sealed with plywood, allowing no light slits. The musty smell was strong, but different from the bunker. This cabin had a fresher soil odor, as if the interior soil had been dug up and refilled within recent years. When shining flashlights into floorboard gaps, an investigator noticed an unusual dark void in the subfloor soil, suggesting the floor might have been raised or previously shifted. The forensic team used a metal bar to tap the floorboards, and a hollow echo sounded at a point near the cabin center. Upon removing the planks, they found compacted soil beneath, but not naturally compacted. The soil was leveled and pressed vertically, characteristic of an area that had been excavated and backfilled. Excavation began on site. After clearing the topsoil layer more than 1 foot deep, a pungent, sweet, heavy odor typical of long decomposed remains emerged. Just minutes later, part of an arm bone and ribs stained dark brown from decayed soil appeared. Digging deeper revealed an entire human skeleton lying supine, with the leg bones slightly flexed, as if the victim had been placed in a tight space or died in a contracted position. The skeleton was wearing remnants of a dark-colored sports t-shirt and old trekking pants, both rotted but still identifiable in style. In the remaining pants pocket was a small fabric piece embroidered with white thread, TB, matching how Tyler Brooks marked his personal items. When removing the skeleton from the pit, the forensic team also found a short, partially rotted nylon tie lying directly under the lumbar spine, possibly used to restrain the victim before burial. Along the skull was a long, sharp crack, inconsistent with natural decomposition or soil compression pressure. The medical examiner determined the crack showed characteristics of direct blunt force impact, most likely from being struck hard with a hard object. This matched 3 small skull fragments broken at the temple region, suggesting strong force at or just before death. After in-depth analysis, the forensic team confirmed the estimated height matched Tyler Brooks's profile. Tyler's dental records were compared to the intact upper molars, and white composite fillings at positions R14 and R15 matched perfectly with archived 2007 dental records. Identity confirmation was declared the same day. When assessing decomposition, the medical examiner noted distinct soil layering near the bones. The recent backfill layer lay directly over older soil. This allowed estimation of burial time around 2011-2012. Investigators cross-referenced this time frame with the bunker log and noted that from late 2011 to early 2012, the journal had many scattered notes, missing, no longer, hard night, stable again, and only one. These words did not clearly describe actions or tasks, but in light of the new evidence, they could be interpreted as the period when only one victim remained alive after Tyler's death. The investigation also noted the second cabin was built more solidly than the bunker, but showed little recent use. The floor structure used old pine wood, but the edging used newer wood, indicating modifications or restructuring in the 2010-2012 period, coinciding with Tyler's death year. When scanning the cabin with UV light, the forensic team detected small splatter marks on 2 west wall planks, with low protein levels but still present. Though insufficient for DNA analysis due to long degradation, these traces indicated the cabin had been the site of a violent incident, likely related to Tyler's cause of death. On the wooden table in the cabin, they found a long rusted bent nail adhering to unidentified tissue. Quick testing showed it was not animal tissue. Though its exact function could not be determined, the nail was seized as evidence due to likely connection to the events leading to Tyler's death. The second cabin also lacked living items or signs of habitation, reinforcing that it was used briefly, dedicated solely to controlling or handling victims. After excavation was complete and the cabin fully photographed, the investigation team concluded the body found under the cabin floor was Tyler Brooks, the third victim of the 2008 disappearance case, who died in 2011-2012 under circumstances showing signs of violence and was intentionally buried in a carefully constructed and camouflaged structure. The second cabin became a crucial link, showing the perpetrator controlled multiple sites and relocated victims across phases, while revealing a level of calculation and operational scope far greater than the investigation team had initially anticipated. When the 2 bodies had been discovered, and the bunker along with the second cabin provided clear evidence of a chain of captivity lasting many years, the investigation team shifted its focus to identifying the individual who had built, operated, and maintained the entire system. Analysis of traces in the bunker, the captivity log, digital photos, and various other items of evidence all indicated that the perpetrator had extensive knowledge of the White Mountains forest. Skills in handmade construction, understanding of local trails, the ability to move stealthily, and especially a habit of approaching hikers through photography activities. From the images recovered on the SD card, the analysis team identified the face of the man appearing in the footage from October 12, 2008, at Lafayette Place Campground, which matched multiple selfies unintentionally reflected on the camera lens surface captured in several heavily zoomed photos. Facial recognition technology matched these features to a subject previously recorded in multi-state civil databases, Brandon Hale, born in 1974, with no stable employment, who had lived nomadically in Vermont, Maine, Colorado, and Montana before appearing in New Hampshire around 2006. Background records showed that Brandon grew up in an unstable family, with an alcoholic father and a mother who left home when he was only 9 years old. During his teenage years, Brandon dropped out of school early and was repeatedly arrested for trespassing in national forests, poaching without permits, and living in remote forest areas for days at a time. In the years that followed, Brandon moved from state to state, leaving only brief traces of activity in each place before disappearing. In Montana in 1998, he was investigated for approaching 2 teenage girls at a campground in Glacier National Park, using the excuse of photographing scenery, but asking them to stand near a high cliff edge. The incident ended only when a ranger happened to pass by, and Brandon fled the area before he could be questioned. In 2002 in Colorado, he was accused by a group of hikers of stalking them on a trail for hours and repeatedly trying to convince them to pose for photos at a beautiful spot that was actually an area with no view at all. This report did not lead to prosecution due to lack of criminal evidence, but the local ranger noted in the file, subject shows a tendency to stalk small groups, preferring solo hikers or inexperienced small groups. In 2005 in Maine, a woman reported that Brandon had photographed her without permission and acted overly familiar when offering to take more photos deeper in the woods. Several hikers who encountered Brandon also described his habit of asking about their itineraries, stops, and return times, as if screening potential victims. Although no specific criminal acts were conclusively proven during those years, the series of reports from multiple states revealed a repeated behavioral pattern. Brandon used his camera as a means of approach, creating opportunities to separate victims from larger groups and lead them to isolated areas. When investigators delved deeper into Brandon's movement patterns, they noticed he often chose to live in forested mountain areas with similar terrain. Rocky slopes, side trails, places where hidden structures could be built without detection. This perfectly matched the location of the bunker and second cabin in the Kilkenny forest. Combining the captivity log with the times Brandon appeared in New Hampshire, from campground residency records near Franconia Notch, the investigation team determined that Brandon had been in the area at least since 2006, when he began frequently being seen with a DSLR camera, the same type as the one found in the first cabin. Several hikers who encountered Brandon in the White Mountains stated that he had an overly friendly demeanor, often asked to photograph strangers, and showed particular interest in those planning to branch off onto side trails from the main route. These statements perfectly matched the photos and metadata showing Brandon had approached various other hikers, not just the group of Evan, Hannah, and Tyler. Notably, records from Vermont showed that in 2007, Brandon was suspected in connection with the brief disappearance of a solo hiking student. The person was found 36 hours later, in a mildly disoriented state, but unable to clearly remember what had happened. The investigation at the time could not prove Brandon's involvement, but the victim's description of a man with a camera, speaking with a northeastern accent, who led me onto a side trail matched Brandon exactly. When all the data was compiled, the investigation team determined that Brandon Hale had a behavioral pattern lasting at least 15 years, centered on approaching hikers, separating them from main trails under the pretext of photography, and then leading them deeper into the forest where he fully controlled the space and exits. This pattern precisely explained the mechanism that led the three victims in 2008 away from the main route and to follow Brandon to the bunker area. The scattered reports from multiple states in prior years, when pieced together from this new perspective, showed that Brandon was not just an eccentric drifter, but an individual with a clear predatory tendency, selecting targets from groups of young hikers who traveled light, lacked experience, and were easily persuaded by a seemingly friendly amateur photographer. The investigation team concluded that Brandon Hale had not only built the bunker and cabin system in Kilkenny to hide himself, but also to sustain the captivity cycle, corresponding to the regular entries in the captivity log. The overlap between his long-term behavioral pattern, the seized physical evidence, and the victim approach mechanism made Brandon Hale the central and sole suspect capable of operating the entire captivity system from 2008 to 2015. Once Brandon Hale's identity and behavioral history were clearly established, the investigation team moved to the phase of analyzing motive and the connection between his psychological characteristics and the multi-year captivity chain. Studying the notebooks, evidence in the bunker and second cabin, and Evan Miller's memory responses allowed for the construction of a relatively complete behavioral model, showing that Brandon did not act solely on violent impulses, but possessed a distorted ideology centered on the concept of erasing old identity and recreating people according to his will. Among the documents recovered from the bunker, in addition to the tabular captivity log, there were a few loose sheets with repeated phrases like "no name, clean slate," "quiet, no return," written in hard, even handwriting, most likely notes Brandon wrote to himself to reinforce his view of the captives. This aligned with the fact that Evan was found with his head and beard completely shaved just weeks before escaping. The shaving was not random. In many psychological control models, this act is symbolic. Erasing personal markers, severing the victim's connection to their former identity, and reducing their ability to see themselves as a free person. The notebook also showed that Brandon changed his captivity methods over time. In the 2008-2010 period, notes focused on adjusting light, consistent with Evan being held in a limited light environment, to the point that, when found, he reacted extremely strongly to natural light. Investigators determined that Brandon viewed light as a tool to control the victim's biological rhythms and mental state. Reducing light caused captives to lose track of time, leading to complete dependence on the controller. In addition to light, sound played a key role in the captivity mechanism. Notes like machine steady, reduce load, keep sound even matched Evans' description of the generator noise. A constant, repetitive cycle like background suppression that could drive victims into a dazed state or loss of day-night distinction. In the second cabin, a mini generator was found inactive but with signs of years of use, indicating that the machine's sound was not just for powering light, but something Brandon deliberately maintained as part of the captivity environment. Beyond environmental control, Brandon showed a tendency to categorize and mark victims. Certain symbols in the notebook, like 1, only one left, no 2, indicated he tracked the number of captives like operational data. There was no evidence he used victims' names. Instead, numbering replaced names, reflecting his desire to strip away their personhood. This pattern aligned with Evan being unable to recall his own name for weeks after rescue. When placing these elements into a psychological model, the analysis team concluded that Brandon exhibited extreme control obsession traits, where victims were seen not as people but as test subjects for his personal delusions. The bunker and second cabin were not just physical spaces but environments Brandon designed to enforce his distorted views: absolute isolation, absolute control, and complete erasure of prior life traces. Behavioral evolution over time was also clear in the data. In the early years, the captivity system focused on maintaining isolation and light control. By the 2010-2013 period, when only one victim remained alive, notes shifted to stable, weak, maintain, showing Brandon adjusted control intensity and possibly shifted from sustaining 2 people to just 1. This matched Hannah's death in 2009 and Tyler's in 2011-2012, after which the bunker served only Evan. Moving Tyler to the second cabin rather than keeping him in the bunker indicated Brandon tiered captivity environments. The larger cabin deeper in the forest was likely for the phase when victims no longer held value under his distorted criteria. Investigators determined the second cabin was used as the end-of-life cycle location in Brandon's criminal logic, clearly showing victim staging by phase. From all the data, criminal psychology experts concluded that Brandon Hale did not act from common motives like violent desire, revenge, or impulsive behavior. Instead, he displayed a disorder involving identity modeling, obsession with stripping away the old person from victims, and recreating a version he could fully control. Shaving hair, limiting light, numbering instead of naming, controlling sound, and isolating from reality were all tools to break down victims' personality structures over long periods. The notebook and concealment techniques for hatches, rock caves, and the cabin proved his actions were systematic, continuous, and improved year by year, not impulsive, but a captivity model Brandon refined into increasing sophistication. Upon fully analyzing the physical evidence in the bunker and second cabin, along with Evans' fragmented statements, the investigation team began reconstructing the captivity and abuse mechanism that Brandon Hale imposed on the 3 victims throughout their years of disappearance. The notes in the leather-bound log, though brief and encoded in symbols, when cross-referenced with Evans' physical injuries and the deaths of Hannah and Tyler, revealed a rigidly operated forced routine designed to eradicate will, strength, and identity in the captives. The log clearly showed a fixed daily cycle. Light was turned on for only a few minutes each day, sometimes just once or twice, after which the bunker was completely sealed, leaving victims in near absolute darkness. This matched Evans' medical exam results: severe vitamin D deficiency, extreme photosensitivity, and disrupted circadian rhythms. Psychologists determined that the extremely low light cycle deprived captives of day-night distinction, leading to prolonged confusion and complete dependence on signals from the captor. Beyond light control, the nutrition regimen Brandon imposed was described in notes with symbols like 1/2, little reduce, aligning with medical evidence. Evans suffered malnutrition equivalent to prolonged starvation, with protein, iron, and fat levels near zero for extended periods. Victims' rations likely consisted only of simple foods like dry grains or canned goods, given in amounts sufficient to sustain life, but not to preserve muscle or immunity. This explained Evan's widespread muscle atrophy in legs and back, as well as why Hannah and Tyler succumbed faster to prolonged nutrient deprivation. The log also clearly distinguished between the 3-person and 2-person periods, then 1-person, showing increasing control as victim numbers decreased. In the 3-person phase, from late 2008 to mid-2009, notes included symbols like X2, keep quiet at night, no talking. Investigators determined Brandon enforced strict silence rules, likely allowing only eye contact or minimal signals. This matched Evan's state upon rescue: severely impaired speech, broken voice, and inability to form complete sentences for many initial days. In the 2-person phase, late 2009 to 2011, notes like weak, check, adjust appeared more frequently. This aligned with forensic conclusions that Hannah died around 2009, likely the first to fully succumb. Poor nutrition, prolonged darkness, and lack of movement were sufficient to cause multi-organ failure without care. In cases of restraint or movement restriction, decline accelerated. Circular indentations on Hannah's wrist bones indicated prolonged binding, impairing circulation, and hastening death. The log also contained punishment-related symbols: cut, off, close, no up, punish. This was interpreted as mechanisms for defiance or non-compliance. Criminal psychology experts stated Brandon used deprivation of light, reduced rations, or restricted ventilation as punishment. This fit the bunker's design: small vent pipes easily manipulated from outside to reduce airflow. Evan reacted strongly to sounds resembling metal closing opening, which investigators identified as Brandon sealing the hatch or locking ventilation. The final phase, when only 1 victim survived, Evan, from 2012 to 2015, had log notes shifting to only 1 maintain: stable, quiet, showing Brandon treated sustaining Evan as routine. Years of decline, combined with insufficient light and movement, left Evan nearly unable to walk upon escape. His muscle atrophy level indicated periods where he could barely leave a bed or fixed area in the bunker. For Tyler, the second cabin, where his body was found, represented an end cycle in the captivity model. The larger cabin, with fewer use traces, raised wooden floor, and burial area beneath, indicated it was where the perpetrator moved victims when they no longer held value or strength for the main bunker. Skull trauma on Tyler, fractures from blunt force, suggested he may have resisted or attempted escape, leading to confrontation and direct violent punishment. Putting all data together, the investigation team concluded Brandon Hale's captivity mechanism operated on 3 main pillars: environmental control, survival control, and identity control. These elements, running continuously over years, not only destroyed physical condition, but eradicated victims' will, leaving them incapable of resistance or time awareness. This cycle led to the slow, painful deaths of Hannah and Tyler, while Evan, though he survived, escaped the bunker in a state of utter exhaustion and with almost no coherent awareness of the outside life from years before. When the detention and abuse mechanism had been fully reconstructed and all physical evidence collected from the bunker, the second cabin, the hidden compartment, and surrounding areas pointed to a criminal pattern spanning more than 7 years, the NH State Police and the FBI decided to enter the final phase of the investigation, locating the current whereabouts of Brandon Hale and executing his arrest. Through travel history, scattered reports from multiple states, and especially registration records at several campgrounds around Franconia Notch from 2006-2015, investigators determined a high likelihood that Brandon was still living in the administrative areas of Carroll County or Grafton County, where he could access deep forest without drawing attention. Tips provided by locals between 2013-2016, including descriptions of a man living in an old trailer who often left before dawn, carrying a large camera, led the investigation team to a remote suburban area in the town of Twin Mountain. This area consisted of a few scattered trailers, abandoned vehicles, and dirt roads leading into the forest, terrain perfectly suited to Brandon's reclusive lifestyle. After 2 weeks of surveillance, the Special Operations Team identified a moment when Brandon was alone in the trailer, and executed the arrest warrant. When the SWAT team entered at 4:20 a.m., he did not resist strongly, but attempted to flee toward the back door, only to be subdued within seconds. Inside the trailer, the cramped space was filled with cluttered items: camping bags, daggers, nylon rope, gasoline cans, and a newer DSLR camera model compared to the one found in the cabin. Most importantly, in an old metal box under the bed, investigators discovered 2 external hard drives wrapped in moisture-proof bags. These hard drives were sealed and transferred to a federal digital forensics lab. When the data was extracted, a large volume of photos and videos emerged, spanning from 2004 to 2015. There were hundreds of photos taken in the White Mountains from various remote locations, including areas near the bunker and the second cabin. Some photos matched those found on the SD card of the DSLR in the first cabin, proving they were taken by the same person. Notably, there were multiple photos of Evan, Hannah, and Tyler on October 12, 2008, from different angles, before and after they left the main trail. Some images even captured them being instructed to stand in specific positions and face the direction Brandon indicated, direct evidence of initial contact and control. In another folder, experts also found photos of other hikers with expressions of anxiety or unease, suggesting that Brandon had approached multiple potential victims before and during the detention of the 3 primary victims. More alarmingly, several short videos recorded the interiors of the bunker and the second cabin at different stages. In the videos, dim yellow light cast on wooden walls, accompanied by the steady cyclic hum of a generator, perfectly matching Evan's fragmented memories and the physical traces in the bunker. Upon examining the second hard drive, technicians discovered a digital log file in spreadsheet format, similar in content to the handwritten notebook in the bunker, but more detailed. Numerous entries tracked daily activities, feeding times, ventilation checks, and milestones, marking changes in the detention process. This data reinforced the timeline that Brandon had maintained continuous detention from 2008 to at least 2015, when the digital log ended. In addition to the electronic data, numerous pieces of evidence seized from the trailer matched DNA samples found in the bunker, a length of the same type of nylon rope, a bandana containing Evan's DNA, and 2 long hairs consistent with Hannah's, and a dagger with old bloodstains identified as belonging to Tyler Brooks through mitochondrial DNA testing. These results formed a strong DNA evidence chain, directly linking Brandon to the bunker, cabins, and victims. During interrogation, Brandon refused to cooperate, remaining silent or responding with meaningless statements. But this did not affect the prosecution process, as the physical evidence was sufficient to charge him. Just 3 days after his arrest, Brandon Hale was indicted on charges including first-degree kidnapping, prolonged unlawful detention, manslaughter related to detention conditions, first-degree murder in the cases of Hannah and Tyler, and numerous other charges related to violent acts and personal violations. The initial trial was held at the Grafton County Courthouse, with close involvement from federal prosecutors due to the severity and duration of the case. During the trial, the prosecution reconstructed the entire timeline by layering all evidence: 2008 trailhead footage, digital photos on the SD card, detention logs, evidence from the bunker and cabin, forensic results for Hannah and Tyler, Evan's physical injuries, and data from Brandon's hard drives. The judge and jury spent many hours reviewing images, videos, and simulated diagrams of the bunker, second cabin, and surrounding areas, all reinforcing a systematic detention pattern. Additionally, criminal psychology experts were called to present analyses of Brandon's obsession with identity erasure and control patterns, explaining how he maintained power through limited lighting, low nutrition, environmental control, and phased victim separation. The prosecution emphasized the sophistication of his concealment techniques: perfectly camouflaged trapdoors, Hannah's rock burial, covered with moss and dry branches, matching the terrain, the raised floor of the second cabin, hiding Tyler's body, and all structures located in positions difficult for drones to detect before the search area was narrowed. The defense could not deny Brandon's DNA, fingerprints, and electronic data appearing at nearly every crime scene, so they shifted to arguing mental illness. However, psychological records showed no evidence of diminished capacity. On the contrary, the years-long calculated planning proved he was fully aware of his actions. After 3 weeks of trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: Brandon Hale guilty of first-degree murder, federal kidnapping, and unlawful detention causing severe consequences. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole for the 2 murder counts, plus an additional 60 years on federal charges for the remaining offenses. This was the maximum sentence, reflecting the brutality, duration, and systematic nature of the crimes, while officially closing the case of the 3 hikers detained for 7 years in the Kilkenny forest. When the sentence was announced, the case of the 3 hikers detained in the White Mountains was officially closed in court, but its consequences continued to spread for many months afterward. Brandon Hale was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for the 2 counts of first-degree murder, plus an additional 40 years on federal charges for kidnapping, unlawful detention, and other violent acts, ensuring he would never have the opportunity to return to free life. Immediately after the trial, the remains of Hannah Reyes and Tyler Brooks were returned to their families, ending nearly a decade of agonizing unresolved waiting. Both families held private memorial services, but also organized a joint remembrance on Franconia Ridge, where the 3 friends began their final journey. These ceremonies were not only to bid farewell, but also to affirm that, despite perishing in brutal circumstances, Hannah and Tyler had finally been found, named, and restored the identities that had been stripped from them for so long. Evan Miller, the sole survivor, continued living at a specialized psychological recovery center in Concord. Doctors assessed that he would need many years of treatment to restore communication abilities, regulate circadian rhythms, and minimize panic responses to bright light or mechanical sounds. Although he had regained weight and gradually recovered physical strength, Evan still struggled with recalling timelines, and in many therapy sessions, he could only describe memories in fragmented words. His family visited regularly, but was advised to limit deep probing into his missing years to avoid triggering trauma responses. The recovery center reported that Evan was making progress, but required a long-term stable environment to rebuild a sense of safety after years of absolute control. The case also triggered a major wave of changes in the White Mountains and throughout New Hampshire's trail management system. After the full events were made public, the Appalachian Mountain Club and New Hampshire Fish and Game implemented a series of new regulations, expanding camera coverage at major trailheads, adding personal emergency alert buttons on certain main routes, requiring hikers to register routes online and check in upon completion, and increasing patrols on previously overlooked side trails. These reforms aim to ensure no hiker could be led into dangerous areas without leaving tracking data. Furthermore, all unauthorized cabins were thoroughly surveyed and dismantled, including more than 20 old structures that had existed unnoticed in the forest for years, to prevent the risk of similar crimes in the future. By early 2017, nearly a year after Brandon Hale's arrest, the NH State Police officially closed case file WM0-8144, noting it as one of the longest and most complex missing persons, detention, murder cases in the region's history. Though the file was closed, the case left a profound mark on the hiking community and New Hampshire residents, serving as a reminder that even the most familiar and seemingly safe mountain areas can conceal darkness. Although justice had been served and the 3 victims finally found, the psychological and social aftermath of the case lingered, but at least the truth had been revealed, and those whose identities had been stolen for years were finally given back their voices in their own history. The story of the 3 hikers who disappeared in the White Mountains, and the shocking truth revealed only after nearly a decade, is not just a personal tragedy, but also reflects the very real challenges that Americans today face when engaging in outdoor activities, trusting strangers, or underestimating the dangers of nature. Brandon Hale's approach to the victims under the guise of an amateur photographer, using outward friendliness and a DSLR camera to gain their trust, highlights the importance of remaining vigilant against unexpected encounters, even in places considered safe like trailheads or popular trails. In today's America, where outdoor culture is increasingly popular and millions flock to national parks each year, this story reminds us that thorough preparation and heightened awareness remain the foundation of safety. Evan's discovery in a severely debilitated state, with extreme reactions to light and sound and long-term psychological damage, also shows that survival does not always mean escaping danger, but sometimes a years-long journey of healing. The fact that New Hampshire authorities later had to revise regulations, add trailhead cameras, require route registration, and remove unauthorized cabins demonstrates that communities can, and should, learn from tragedy to improve safety for everyone. For individuals, there are two key lessons. First, never leave the main trail based solely on a stranger's suggestion, even if the person appears harmless. Second, always share your route. Update expected return times and carry a locator or SOS device, especially in deep forest areas with poor signal. The story of Evan, Hannah, and Tyler is a painful reminder that a single small decision, turning onto a side trail with an unfamiliar person, can lead to tragedy lasting many years. If you found this story helpful and want to continue following real-life cautionary cases like this, please hit subscribe so you don't miss future content. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video with stories that help us step into nature more safely and mindfully.